So last video we started looking at a little bit of statics type stuff of finding forces and tensions and cables and stuff when things are hanging and stuff like that. So I'm going to try a little bit of that today or in this video, and we'll see what we can do. So we're going to crack out the same picture we did last time. There was this picture right here, except we'll do this a little bit differently. Suppose instead we've got like the side of a wall or something. There you go, like the side of a building. Often signs come off the sides of buildings for different reasons. We'll say there's a little there's like a little hinge right here and a post coming out to support the picture. So of course the picture could swing up and down. So in order to keep that from happening, often you'll see like a cable or a rope or something like that, or a chain holding it to the side of the building, something like that. Okay, and let's say our picture here, let's say this is an 8 kilogram picture or sign, and the cable rope here, let's say, is 60 degrees right there, and we want to know the tension. Okay, so pretty straightforward. It's nothing too crazy or weird. We'll just start with simple stuff. We know that gravity is involved with this because this is statics in your gravity section. Gravity is involved with anything, and just applying your force and stuff to this. So let's find the weight of the picture. So we just start with that. When we know it's 8 kilograms, we can just times that by the 9.81 to get the weight of it. And so if we do that, we get the 8 times 9.1. The picture has a weight, we'll just round off, make it easier, a weight around 78 newtons. So that is the weight of the picture, and of course that is the force that is pulling down. Well, if we have 78 newtons pulling down, we have to have 78 newtons pulling up. And there's only one thing, there's no 2 cables, there's only one cable. That one cable has to be pulling up with 78. So if there's 78 going down, this cable's got to be pulling up with 78 going up. And you could draw it here if you want to, or a lot of people will actually draw it here so they can visualize the triangle a little better. It doesn't make any difference. But this is 78 newtons pulling up. Well, this is just a right triangle. That's all this is. So I've got the sideways part right there. There's my triangle. It's a triangle with 60-degree angle, and the opposite is 78 newtons. So if I just used basic sine theta, sine the angle, I would have the 78 is the opposite, and then that would be the tension, of course, is the hypotenuse. And once you have that, it's relatively easy to solve for what the tension in the cable might be. So if I just sort of switch things around, if I do 78 divided by sine theta, I'll have the tension. And if I do that, your tension is, give or take, it's going to be around 91 newtons. So it's about 91 newtons of tension in the cable. Okay. Now, it's interesting because when you actually see this type of stuff, you don't see it very much where we live, but if you go to other places like Europe and stuff like that, they have a lot of signs off the sides of buildings like this. And if you actually notice, the cables are often go really, really high up. And the reason they go really, really high up is all about the extra tensions incorporated. So if you would take maybe a cable that was at a really, really, really low angle, something like this, and we did the exact same question, well, if the weight of the picture is 78, then this part here would be 78. And if that little line there represents 78, this is going to be a huge amount of tension in the rope or the cable. Now, if we change it a little bit, if the cable was really, really tall, well, the vertical part still represents 78. And then you can see that this line here, the tension in the cable, would actually be very, very close to the 78. So the problem with having cables really flat like this when they're supporting stuff against gravity is you introduce a huge amount of sideways tension, which then massively increases the amount of overall tension in the rope or the cable. Now that's why you try and have like support cables and stuff this as vertical as you can, and so that you can actually match up to the force of gravity. Now it also takes into consideration of where you can place it. Like you can't just put it really, really close to the side of the building so it's almost vertical, because things like torque kick in, a bunch of stuff you haven't taken yet. But typically you want the cables, that's why you often see cable supporting signs to be more vertical than horizontal, just to reduce the amount of X tension, which really increases the Y tension. Or not the Y tension, the overall tension in the cable. Okay, well, let's look at something else. Let's get rid of this. All right, so let's crack out here. Let's use this. Okay. All right, so here we got a Lego piece. Okay, we'll do a little bit different here. Got a Lego piece, and let's say it's hanging from some kind of purple ceiling for some reason. I'll make it brown. There we go. Nah, keep purple. Okay, and we're gonna have a couple cables supporting it. Maybe a cable like this, a cable like this, something like that. All right. So let's say we've got a 25 kilogram Lego piece, and let's say the two cables supporting it, we'll say they're totally symmetrical. Let's say that's 65 degrees and that's 65 degrees, something like this. Some people like to use the angles in here. It doesn't make a difference, they're the same angles. And we can piece things together. And once again, we're going to start nice and simple. What is the tension in that cable or rope? Well, one of the first things is, since it's nice and symmetrical, the two tensions are going to be equal to each other, so that makes things a lot easier. So first things first, gravity's involved. I can find the mg for my block. So you get the 25, you get the 9.81. We can find out that the weight of the block is around 245 newtons. And that force of gravity, since everything is nice and symmetrical, will be split evenly between the two cables. So we got that nice symmetry. So we can just cut that in half. And if we cut that in half, we'll round off. This will be 123 newtons pulling up this way, and we'd have 123 newtons pulling up this way. Okay, so this is very similar to before. We have basically a triangle. We got the bottom of the triangle right there, 65 degrees. We have the opposite, use sine theta, and you can find the tension in the cable. And since it's symmetrical, the two tensions will be equal to each other. So we put that all together. The tension over there is about 136 newtons using basic trig. And since it's symmetrical, the two tensions will be equal. 136 here and 136 there. All right, so let's try a different scenario. Let's get rid of this. All right, so here, let's crack out our wheel of cheese. And let's get a top part here like this. All right, something like that. And we're going to make this one not symmetrical and see how that works. So again, supporting our wheel of cheese with two ropes or cables or something like that. There we go. And let's see. Let's say we got a 5.5 kilogram block of cheese. Let's say this is at 68 degrees right there, and let's say there's 46 newtons of tension in that cable, and I want to know what is the tension in my second cable. Okay, all right, well, let's see if we can piece things together. Let's find the tension over there, and we can also find the angle over here. What's the second angle as well? We can solve for that. Okay, well, let's start simple. Find the weight of the cheese. Okay, we know it's involved. We got the 5.5 for the mass. We know gravity. So let's find the weight of the cheese. And we're looking around 54 newtons. Now this 54 is not going to be split evenly between the two cables because they're not symmetrical. This one actually supports more of the weight because it's the most vertical. Okay, now if I look at this cable, I've got a force, I've got the tension, I've got an angle, and when we have force at angles, we often just break them up, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Is we're going to break this thing up. We're going to turn it into a right triangle that is also 68 degrees, and you can find the horizontal and the vertical components of that triangle. So if I use my cos and my sine, I got the 46 cos 68, I got the 46 sine 68. I can find out that down here, I've got around 17.2 newtons going sideways, and over here I've got 42.7 newtons vertically, and this would be, I'll call that my tension 1 in the X and my tension 1 in the Y. Those are my two forces. Okay, now I know something about how these forces connect. I know that the X ones have to be equal. Okay, so I know this one is also pulling sideways and it's also pulling vertically. Now I know it doesn't look like it because this line is way longer, but this one also has to be 17.2 newtons. Don't confuse force vectors with distance vectors and how long these things were drawn. These forces have to be equal. This would be tension number 2 in the x, and they have to be equal because this one's pulling with 17 to the left, this one has to be pulling with 17 to the right. Okay. Now I also know that my vertical components have to add up to 54. So I have to have 54 newtons going down, so I have to have 54 newtons going up. Well, this one here is pulling with like 42, 43 newtons going up, which means the remainder of the force going up must be over here. So this one must be pulling with like 11.3 newtons going up. So that 42.7 up and that 11.3 going up, those two pulling up will equal that 54 going down. And now that I have the horizontal part, which matches this horizontal part, and this vertical part that I found by finding how much I was missing from gravity, I can then solve for my tension with good old-fashioned Pythagoras. So square that, add them up, root it, and you can find out the tension. And it should be just a little bit higher than the 17. And if we do that, we should get around 21 newtons as the tension in that cable over there. So even though that cable is longer than the other one, it has less tension because it's less vertical. The one that's more vertical is the one that will actually support more of the weight. Okay. And then if we solve for the angle, you can use tan theta if you want to. A lot of people just solve for this angle, which is the same as that angle there. They just use tan theta to solve for it. I'd recommend using tan theta in case you got this wrong. Then if you sine or cos, your angle will be wrong. But it's a pretty small angle compared to the other one. And if we do that, this ends up being around 33 degrees. So this would also be around 33 degrees. So there you go. So that's how you can solve it with things that are not symmetrical. Okay, x's are equal, y's add up to gravity. Okay, so let's try this one. Here we got a Spider-Man hanging upside down with two webs. One's at 56 with 710 newtons, and the other one's at 20 degrees, and we're going to try and find his mass. Now, first things first, you got to force at an angle, so let's break this apart and find the x and y components. If we do that using basic trig, there's your 56 degrees in there as well. This right here should be 397 newtons. And the vertical one would be like 589 newtons. All right, now just like before, we can make a triangle on this side. The x components have to be equal to each other. So I got 397 over here. I have to have 397 newtons over there. And this is also 20 degrees if it's easier to visualize that angle. So if I have the 20 degrees here, and I've got the 397 over there, I can use my tan theta to figure out what my missing vertical component would be. So if I just use the tan of 20 degrees, opposites, what I'm looking for, adjacent, would be the 397. And obviously smaller to smaller angle, we will get a vertical component here about 144 newtons. So on this side, I've got 144 pulling up. On the other side, I've got 589 pulling up. And of course, this is pulling up and this is pulling up because, of course, Spider-Man is pulling down with his force of gravity. So if I add those two together, I will have his weight or his force of gravity. So those two put together, the 589 and the 144, gives me about 733 newtons of downward force. And then all I have to do to find his mass is Fg divided by G, just undo it, and he will have a mass of about 75 kilograms, and that's it. So once again, if you got to think at an angle, break apart the force. The x's have to be equal to each other, and the verticals have to add up to whatever the mass's weight is.